Okay, thank you for being here for the next set of talks. So I'm very happy to introduce Saptarshi Pal from Harvard, who's going to tell us about understanding large language model behavior in repeated games.
Hi, thanks everyone. This has been great. Thanks to the organizers. And yeah, after the panel discussion on serious stuff, let's talk about some silly experiments that I did. I've been getting into this thing since about a year now, and it's about how large language model behave in repeated games. So what I'm gonna be talking about today is so two papers. One will be soon online, and those are with authors at Dartmouth and Harvard. And then the other one is in preparation. It would be for a special issue at Interface Focus. And this is with Philip, who is also going to give a talk tomorrow. And so we heard a lot about games. So this talk is about repeated games. And we will hear more talks later in this workshop. But just to give a formal introduction, repeated games are important models in biology. And they give a lot of insight about what kind of emergent behavior we would see or expect to see when interactions are repeated instead of one shot. And in today's talk, the repeated game that we're going to talk about is the iterated prisoner's dilemma. And we have seen the prisoner's dilemma. There are two players here in purple and orange. And for the four outcomes that can happen in the game, the payoffs are 3, 0, 5, and 1. In Dan talk, we saw that these are like variables. But this is like one particular institution of them, and these numbers are popular because of Axelrod's original experiments on computer programs. And so if this game was just going to happen once, so defection strictly dominates cooperation, players would just stop defect, and that would be very boring. But if you had several rounds, there could be two possibilities. So one possibility is that the game continues for finitely many rounds. So there are 10 rounds, and players know there are 10 rounds. Or it could be the case that the game terminates with some probability after each round. And the object of interest in a game like this is the expected payoff per round. So you see how much payoff the player gets at round one, plus how much payoff it gets in expectation in round two. This is conditioned on the fact that round two actually happens, and so on. And then you normalize it by the expected number of rounds. And in the theory of repeated games, the idea is that if games are repeated, full cooperation, which is often what researchers are interested in, it can be achieved at equilibrium through various strategies. So evolutionary dynamics typically aims to construct a evolutionary selection process. So it tries to see which strategies are selected, and that's the role of evolutionary dynamics in repeated games. And this is what we are studying. And since it is a question about selecting strategies, let me just formally define what strategies are in a repeated game. So in a repeated game, at each round, you have outcomes, which are four possibilities. And here the outcomes are written. So for example, CD means I played C and you played D. And a strategy, informally speaking, is just the information that you have at any particular round to a probability to play cooperation in the present round. Typically in repeated games, it's assumed that players have all the information of all past rounds. So this is equivalent to saying that a mapping from outcome of all past rounds to probability to play cooperate in the present round. And an interesting subset of this is the memory one strategies, which just takes into account what happens in the last round. And these are just 5 probabilities. So the probability to cooperate in the first round, which is P0, and the probability to cooperate after the 4 outcomes that can happen in the last round. So CC, CD, DC, and DD. So now if you go to memory 2 strategies, so it would be outcomes of the last 2 rounds. And the strategy should be able to tell you, given what happened in the last 2 rounds, what's the probability to play cooperate now. And this is a collection of 21 probabilities. You have to the strategy has to tell you what to do in round 1, what to do in round 2, and what to do in all subsequent rounds. So yeah, those are interesting subsets of strategies. And you can ask all sorts of questions with strategies. So you can ask which strategy is good, which strategy is like competitive. But here are some useful categories that the literature uses. And the 3 categories are Nash, partner, and rival. So Nash is very well known. So it's a strategy, a Nash, if its payoff against itself is better than any strategy's payoff against it. And partner and rivals are defined in the following way. So a strategy is a partner if it's firstly Nash, and if its payoff against itself is the mutual cooperation payoff. I have to mention that this definition of partner is only valid for games where mutual cooperation is better than alternation. And a rival is a different kind of definition. So a rival strategy is a strategy which gets higher payoff than any opponent in direct competition. So typically these sets look like this. So partners are Nash by definition, so they're always inside. And in the game with positive stopping probability, rivals can be Nash, but rivals don't need to be Nash. And stopping probability is zero. Partners and rivals can have intersect, but otherwise. So yeah, and what we want to do in this paper, in the first paper, is to ask what memory one or memory two strategies do the commercial LLMs that were very popular now use effectively. And I'll tell you what effectively means. And then we want to ask, are these effective strategies special in any sense? Like, are they Nash? Are they partners or rivals? And we are going to also ask how sensitive are these to game parameters and forms. Yeah, and the approach that we're going to do is, so typically the standard approach in the field of LLMs and repeated games is to make LLMs play against each other. But here the approach is much simpler. So instead of like simulating plays between LLMs, we enumerate over all these histories and we ask the LLM, what do you choose? So as simple as that. So yeah, here's the prompt. So our prompt to the LLM has 5 parts. And these are, so I'll just read through. So you're in an interaction with another agent. Your interaction is over several rounds. So this is literally what we tell the LLM. In each round, you have a choice between L and R. So we are not using corporate and defect or C and D. And the other agent also has a choice between L or R. And two of you will decide whether not without knowing what the other will choose. And depending on your choices, you will receive a reward, which is measured in points. So this is the setup. We provide some setup, and then we inform it about the payoff matrix with this following paragraph. We tell them, and the ones in the brackets are stuff that we can manipulate. And then we tell it a little bit about its objectives and payoffs. So we say your final reward is the total number of points you accumulate in all the rounds, and here is your goal. So we sometimes mention a goal. And in this part, we tell it the outcome. So we say that in the previous round, you chose this action, and the other agent chose this action, therefore you got this point, and the other agent got this point. And then we query. So this is a new round. Do you choose L or R? Give only the character as input and give no explanation. And yeah, this is a full prompt. So we give it to the LLM. The LLM thinks for a second or two and gives out an answer. And here I plot what you get from the 5 LLMs when you do that. And the 5 LLMs have its 5 subplots. And I asked each LLM for what it would do, L or R, after 5 possible things that can happen. So either you're in round 1, or LL happened, or LR happened, or RL happened, or RR happened. And I asked each LLM for each history 50 times. And this is what I get. So firstly, you see that they have very unique behavior. So first of all, Claude is using like a strategy which is called like the forgiver or firm but fair. And so one thing to notice is that all LLMs except Gemini is cooperating fully in the first round. All of them are cooperating fully after LL, but there is some variation in the remaining histories. And these are for these parameters. And you can take these strategies and then normalize it by 50, and you can say this is an effective memory one strategy. And you can do some subsequent analysis. So you can look at what any arbitrary opponent would get against these LLM strategies and try to classify them as Nash equilibrium partner rival. So for example, in this plot, this region determines all the payoffs that are possible in a game between Claude's strategy and an arbitrary opponent. And this is itself payoff. So this is a Nash equilibrium, and it's also a partner. So what to take out from this is that all LLMs actually end up choosing partner strategies. So GPT-4o, it is also a rival because its strategy is Grim. But surprisingly, all of them turn out to be partners. And this is, to me at least, surprising because I've asked each LLM independently after each history. So it's not like I asked them, give me a strategy. I asked them, what would you do after a particular history? And just so that you can compare to a baseline. So if I had fixed this element to be at 50, and if I had randomly sampled PLR, PRL, and PRR, like uniformly randomly, then the chance of hitting a partner strategy is 46%. So LLMs fall in that 46%. So they do choose partner strategies, and they do choose Nash equilibrium strategies in the baseline set. Yeah. That was the first experiment, but then we were interested in, oh, okay. Yeah, then we were interested in further treatment. So in the second experiment, we varied the stopping probability. So we were like, okay, what would happen if we told you that after each round the interaction ends with some probability, and we varied this W to 4 values. And in the third experiment, we actually changed the payoff matrix. So instead of 3051, we now look at a payoff matrix that is 10, 0, 10 plus X and X, where X is like the temptation to defect. So as X grows, it's like defection becomes more and more tempting. And then we did the same thing all over again, which is, yeah. So in the second experiment, we find that uh, some LLMs show some sensitivity. So Gemini, for example, understands this and reduces its probability to cooperate in the first round and also after mutual defection. GPT-4o is sort of confused what to do over here. GPT-5 understands it, like it kind of reduces its probability to cooperate. Llama acts very strangely. So the moment it hears there's a stopping probability, it shifts to grim. So you can see that these behaviors are very unique among the LLMs. And yeah, and Claude, by the way, doesn't even respond. And actually, when you vary X, the payoff matrix, Claude actually also stops, like, it's not sensitive to it. It keeps playing its favorite strategy. Gemini, again, is sensitive. GPT-4o is sensitive. 5 is sensitive. And Llama, again, is like confused after LR. So yeah, these are like some fun things to look at. But then again, you could do the same thing again. You can ask um, whether or not these strategies are not Nash partner or rivals. And here in the second experiment, I've shown with a tick if it's a Nash partner or rival, or with percentages, and the percentages mean what fraction of randomly sampled opponents beat the self-payoff. So the smaller the number, the closer to Nash in some sense. And you can see that Gemini, GPT-4o, Llama, they do pretty well, like even with these variations. So this is surprising. And with the changing in the value of X, which like as you go down, you increase the temptation to defect, you see that some LLMs do pretty well than others. And that's something we did. Yeah, and we also like wanted to see if it's like if you can sway its behavior with like words, which we know we can, but we wanted to like show it. So what we did is that we took our original treatment, and in the place where we said that here is your goal, we tried different sentences. And don't ask me about these sentences. This was I didn't come up with all of them, but you have competitive framings where you say something like try to get more points than the other agent, or you say exploit the other agent as much as possible. Think about winning, maximize your own number of points. Then we have an ambiguous framing, which is play like a pro. And we have some cooperative framings, including be a saint, which is, I guess, cooperative, I guess. And what we find is that, yeah, you see that they are sensitive to these words quite often. So here, a white cell would mean that they are choosing L less frequently. So it's that in competitive framings, they're actually defecting. And in cooperative framings, they're cooperating too much. And if you did a Nash analysis on that, you would find that these competitive framings are mostly rival Nashes or sometimes partner Nashes. And in the baseline treatment, you have partner Nashes. And in the cooperative framing, these strategies are just too cooperative to be Nash. Yeah, and we also did this for memory too. So we said, okay, these are the outcomes of the last 2 rounds. What would you choose? And we enumerated over all the 21 things that can happen in the last round. And we found that, yeah, the LLMs have very unique behavior. All of them cooperative. In the last round, it was mutual cooperation, except Claude, which holds on to its grudge from the second to last round. And in all the other blocks, the LLMs are actually behaving, I would say, in a unique way. But now you can see that Gemini and Llama are no longer Nash. Yeah, but the others are. So my point is that these are not very fascinating results in themselves. The point of this talk is that these are methods that you can use. And this is what I wanted to draw the attention to is, again, this is, yeah, so the point is that this is a thing you can generally do for games. Like you can, like games have information sets, and you just give these information sets to LLMs and inquire for their actions, given that these information sets are like small. And I'll come to that afterwards. But just as a segue, we also did finitely repeated games. So here we didn't give them the outcomes of, like we gave them the outcomes of the entire history of the game. And we found that in the case where we said to the LLMs that there are at least 10 rounds, and we actually had 10 rounds in the game, all LLMs cooperated in all the rounds. But in the games that we told the LLMs that there are exactly 10 rounds, where we would expect them to use backward induction to defect in all the rounds, all LLMs except GPT-5 cooperated in every round, but GPT-5 cooperated in every round except the last. So yeah, they don't do backward induction, but GPT-5 defects in the last. That's something interesting. But yeah, so what I wanted to say that in paper one, we asked the LLMs to choose between L or R 50 times for each history, and we computed the empirical frequency to choose L after each history, and we analyzed the data. We found its effective strategy by normalizing this data, and we did this for various treatments. And this is one approach. But the problem is that this approach, which I showed for repeated games, and you can do for other games, this has an issue of scalability, which means that as the histories grow, the number of as if you go from memory 2 to memory 3 and 4, the sizes of these histories grow. So this method doesn't work in terms of scale. So you can't inquire. It's too much cost and time. And the another thing is that we did a lot of Nash analysis on these strategies. So doing Nash analysis for n greater than or equals to 3 is also very hard. So with current methods, so you can't do this. And then another issue is that yeah, our results do not mean that LLMs would use these strategies if they're given larger histories. Like if you give them 4 or 5 rounds of history, they won't be using these strategies. These are only conditioned to the fact that they're given these 2 rounds only. So yeah, so this is paper 2. This is what we're doing now, like with Philip, and I'm much more excited about this one. So in a larger context, in a larger memory context, I guess the more relevant question is not the strategy, but rather what is the fingerprint of an LLM's action? So you can break this question down into 2 aspects. So you can ask, how far does an LLM look back? So it could look back 1 round ago. It could look back 1 and 2 rounds ago, 1 or 2 and 3, and all 4 rounds. So for now, we're just assuming you give it information about the last 4 rounds. And you could ask what elements of the history is it sensitive to. So one option is that it's sensitive to the full partition. So it really cares about which outcomes happen. It cares about whether it's LL, LR, RL, or RR. Or it might just be sensitive to what you did. So it could be a reactive binning that it does of the outcome. So it will consider LL and RL to be in the same bin because it cares that whether or not you cooperated, and therefore it would also bin LR and RR in the same bin because it cares that you defected. So it could be a reactive blocking, or it could be a self-reactive blocking where it just cares about what it did. Or the LLM probably just cares about whether the actions are symmetric or not. Or it could just count. So the LLM is probably interested in how many players cooperated in the history. So it could be 2, 1, and 0. Yeah, or it could just be unconditional. It just blocks every outcome into 1. So you can have a total of 16 partitions of memory 1 history. So you would hear more about partitions in Philip's talk tomorrow. But what we do is the following. So we want to know that if we have some data about LLMs playing with information of the last 4 rounds, can we say something about how far it's looking back? And can we say something about what partition it is interested in? So what we do is that we collect some data, which looks like this. It's like a dictionary, which takes in history and maps into an action. And let's say you have n samples of them. And let's say these HK are H round histories. And for now, H is going to be 4, and AK is just L or R. And we define this metric that we denote by CEPK, which is called the conditional entropy on the data, under the model that conditions only on partition P and K rounds. So I'm not going to tell you exactly how this is computed, but you can think about this metric as saying to you that how much surprise would you expect, assuming that the data is being generated by the best P comma K model. So you define this metric. It's like a conditional entropy of the data, conditioned on the fact that the model is using a partition P and a look back of K rounds. And this metric varies between log 2 and 0. So log 2 would be maximum surprise, and 0 would be no surprise. So I'll show you some examples to get some intuitions of this. So this metric, which is the conditional entropy, and I'm talking about the partition that is full partition. You block like everything is. Oh, okay. Thank you. So yeah, so for example, if you're doing a strategy that's unconditionally cooperating with 1/3 probability, you're always surprised. And with the look back length, your surprise is not going down. Similarly, but if you're doing all C, you're never surprised. So you're always at 0 with this metric. And with tit for tat, your surprise goes down at 1. And with tit for two tat, your surprise goes down at 2. So yeah, so this is how you should interpret the metric. And what we find with the 4 LLMs is that their curves look like this. So the way to interpret this is that all LLMs are, their all surprises goes down to their minimum values at 4, which means that all LLMs are taking into account all the 4 rounds. GPT-4o's behavior is explained a lot by the first round only. This model is actually playing one action over the other, so that's why its initial surprise is very low, just like all C's, but still its surprise goes down. And Llama's surprise also goes down as you go up the look back list. So all of them are using all the 4 round information. And if you wanted to look into more partitions, you would see that if you tried to fit a reactive or a self-reactive model, they typically don't do very well in explaining the full partition. Whereas if you looked at a counting model, you would find that the counting model actually tracks the full partition surprise very well. So this kind of tells you that the LLM might be actually counting the history that you give it. And yeah, and finally, you can do this for all the partitions. And you can ask how well do the various partitions do to approximate the full partition. And you can find that there are like these four partitions that do very well across all LLMs. And this one is the counting partition that I showed. So the more yellow this is, the more good the data is. And the more, I guess, purple it is, the more bad it is. So this is the counting partition. But this one and this one also does very well. But the one up here, which is, so all these 3 are refinements of this one. And this one already does pretty well, which means that what the LLM is really doing, it's either doing these, or at least it is considering the LL outcome independent to the other 3. So yeah, so and I find it surprising that all the 4 LLMs are looking at, like the band is actually consistent across the LLM. And yeah, so the conclusions, yeah, I guess, yeah, a lot of things were presented at this talk, but if you had to take something back, so I guess one can estimate the effective LLM strategy when it is given information of the last 1 or 2 rounds. And this is typically like not possible if you're interested in larger history behavior. And yeah, we do this for 5 LLMs, and they're surprisingly good at Nash strategies in the baseline conditions. They're also partners, so it's good. But we saw that the prompts and the game parameters are able to sway this behavior. So that's paper 1. But however, like I argue that for longer memory information, like identifying fingerprints seems to be a better approach, like in the way we did. And yeah, the initial results suggest that the LLMs do take into account all the rounds that are presented, so all the past 4 rounds. And their behavior is best approximated by either the counting partition or the partition that treats LL distinctly to the other ones. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat more. Yeah, so this is what I've been working on recently. And yeah, here's a thank you slide. Are we doing a question?
I figure while we get Zhisheng set up, maybe we could do like one very quick question. Oh, okay, Arne.
Did you ask the same questions to, say, prolific or humans? And are AIs more cooperative than humans? And are we looking?
No, we did not do it with humans, but there is data on humans. No, we did not do it.
To ask exactly these same things.
Yeah, that would be
and
interesting.
Ask if kind of AIs are generally more cooperative than humans.
We didn't do that, but that would be a nice thing.